for those of you who don't know, was provided by a good friend of mine, and she had the good grace to draw it for me. And I asked her, hey, she just drew it because she just felt like drawing, and I was like, hey, can I use this? I'm doing a thing, and she went, yeah, totally, it's fine. So that's where this image came from. So usually this is a radio show, right? You're all very used to that sort of format. This, records on records on Friday, goes up on Saturday, sort of thing. The radio booth was locked today, and I felt like I needed to continue doing paper cuts. And this is what I was planning on doing when they started locking me out of the studio anyway. Because that's usually how they tell you you're done. It's just locking you out of the studio. So, this was what I was planning on anyway. Hopefully Twitch doesn't get too bent out of shape about it. I just picked IRL as the category because, there's not really another category unless there's like a general visual novels category. So, anyway, let's get started with paper cuts. Where did I put my water? I'm gonna need that. So, we have, so last I left off, we left off between stories, so I don't really need to have people playing catch-up. And, we are starting a 4-part novel this week, called Brigands of the Moon. Sorry, I'm waiting for people to show up in case they feel like showing up. That's why I'm delaying a little. Oh, heck. Hello. Anyway, so we're paper cuts. Let's go. I was just kicking around waiting for a couple moments to make sure a couple people would show up. Razzie, how's my audio? How's my picture? Is everything shiny? Give me a shout in the chat if things are bent out of shape. Yeah, don't worry, Razzie. I'm a little confused that it's on Twitch myself. I'm so used to just sitting in the radio booth, but the radio booth was locked, and I didn't want to go ask people because I think, yeah, they're doing a Magistrelli show right now, so I don't want to barge into a studio and be like, hey, can you guys come me into the radio? Or they might be working on a basketball game, I'm not sure. One of the two. Regardless, the radio folks were busy, and the booth was locked, and I didn't want to upset anyone by going to go ask to be let in, so we're just gonna read on Twitch. Someone do let me know if IRL is not the right category for me. If there's a actual novels or audiobook category, please tell me. But I'm pretty sure that's not a real thing. I'm pretty sure IRL is probably the closest thing that could happen to this. Anyway, so getting to the book, we begin our journey through the 4-part novel, Brigands of the Moon. I've been thinking that if, during one of those long winter evenings at Valley Forge, someone had placed in George Washington's hands one of our present-day bestsellers, the illustrious father of our country would have read it with considerable emotion. I don't mean what we call a story of science or fantasy, just a novel of action, adventure, and romance. The sort of thing you and I like to read, but don't find amazing in any way at all. But I fancy the George Washington would have found it amazing, don't you? It might picture, for instance, a factory girl at a sewing machine. George Washington would be amazed at a sewing machine. And the girl journeying in the subway to and from her work, stealing an opportunity to telephone her lover at the noon hour, going to the movies in the evening, or listening to a radio. And there might be a climax, perhaps, with the girl and the villain in a transcontinental railway Pullman, and the hero sending frantic telegrams or telephoning the train and then chasing it in his airplane. George Washington would have found it amazing. And I'm wondering how you and I would feel if someone were to give us now a book of ordinary adventure of the sort which will be published 150 years hence. I've been trying to imagine such a book and the nature of its contents. Let us imagine it together. Suppose we walk down Fifth Avenue. A pleasant spring morning of May, 2080. It's not too far from now, honestly. Probably live to see 2080 at this point. Fifth Avenue no doubt will be there. I don't know whether the New York Public Library will be there or not, but we'll assume that it is, and it has some sort of books, printed or in whatever fashion you care to imagine. That's really fitting because I'm reading on an e-book reader. The young man, a library attendant, is surprised at our curiously antiquated aspect. We look as though we were dressed for some historical costume ball. We talk old-fashioned English, like actors in a historical play of the 1930s period. But we get the book. The attendant assures us it's a good average story of action and adventure. Nothing remarkable, but he read it himself and found it interesting. We thank him and take the book. But we find that the language in which it is written is too strange for comfortable reading. And it has names. And it names so many extraordinary things so casually, as though we know all about them, which we certainly do not. So we take it to the kind-hearted librarian in the language division. He modifies it to the old-fashioned English of 1930 and puts occasional footnotes to help explain some of the things we might not understand. Why he should bother to do this for us, I don't know, but let's assume that he does. And now we take the book home in the pneumatic tube, or moving sidewalk, or airship, or whatever it is we take to get home. At this point, buddy, it's probably going to be an electric car. And now that we are home, let's read the book. It ought to be interesting. That's a very strange foreword to a science fiction book, but it also really hits at that kind of like core of the idea of science fiction, in my opinion. Because like there's a thin line between science fiction and science fantasy, in my opinion. I'm gonna get on a soapbox here for a second. So science fiction is like this author presented, taking, you know, a far off setting and making it seem mundane and having a very human story told through it. And it's you know, like as an example, outside of the foreword we just read, Star Trek. There's this huge world of just outlandish, you know, technology and science, and all this is going on. You know, they casually like, oh yeah, let's go use the teleporter, or oh yeah, let's go use the food fabricator, or something along that line. It takes this outlandish technology and just kind of glosses over it. Just kind of goes, oh yeah, that's pretty mundane. And then, you know, in the process of glossing over that story, or glossing over those technologies, the author is then allowed to focus on, you know, telling a very human story, in that, you know, a lot of science fiction is kind of politically motivated because it's trying to, you know, I'm trying to think of an example off the top of my head. Like, again, to point to Star Trek, Star Trek tells a lot of stories of diversity and adversity and overcoming those things. And those are very human stories in an outlandish setting that kind of just, you know, it's an outlandish setting, but at the same time, it's very normal, it's very relatable to the reader. In comparison to science fantasy, which is something like Star Wars, in my opinion, where the outlandish technology is part of the fun of the story, and, you know, you get into that kind of technobabble, like, oh, this thing, it's amazing because it does this, 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 and that, and it's clearly, you know, the focus is on, wow, check out all these cool things that are happening, and the characters kind of become secondary, but they're still a vehicle to tell the story. And personally, I tend to write science fantasy rather than science fiction, although I do enjoy watching and reading good science fiction every now and again. I'm also a great enjoyer of science fantasy, for that matter, but that's also why science fiction and fantasy are kind of usually glommed into the same genre, because a lot of science fiction is technically science fantasy, and, you know, it tells the same kind of fantasy arc, just in a futuristic setting rather than, you know, the world of might and magic. To, I'm sure, reference something. I don't know what I'm referencing there, but it's something. Where am I at if I'm not in the radio booth? I'm sitting in my dorm. looking at my taplop. Got my mic on my desk and everything. I don't know why my webcam is on when it's not being used by anything, but, you know, it's there. Actually, I don't think I deactivated the webcam. Let me do that. Anyway, now that I've prattled on about science fantasy for probably altogether too long, what was I saying? Let's get back to the book. But that's my soapbox for the day. Enjoy. Anyway, let's get back to the book. See, I would put on the face cam. Also, like, people watching the VOD, I'm responding to chat. I promise I'm not just talking to myself. I would put on the face cam, but that makes the video take up more space, and I'm already out of space. Well, actually, I could put on the face cam for the live folks, and then just have, I could put on the face cam for the live folks, and then just have a, I could just have the stream VOD just be the audio that I'm recording separately anyway. That's why I was recording audio separately. I promise I'm smart. Yeah, don't worry. I'm not storing this entire stream VOD. I'm just recording the audio and I'll throw it into the editor with the pictures as I usually do. Anyway, let me move the face cam up a few layers so you guys can see it. Hi, sirens. Everybody's favorite. I don't know if y'all can hear those, but they exist. There's my face. So you get to see me while I hunch over my desk and read books. Isn't that exciting? Anyway, Chapter 1. One may write about oneself and still not be an egoist. Or so at least they tell me. My narrative went broadcast with a fair success. It was pantomimed, and the public flashed me a reasonable approval. And so my disc publishers have suggested that I record it in a more permanent form. I introduce myself, begging grace that I intrude upon your busy minutes with my only excuse that perhaps I may amuse you. For what the commercial sellers of my pictured version were pleased to blare as my handsome face, I ask for your indulgence. My feminine audience of the pantomimes was undoubtedly graciously pleased at my personality and physical aspect. That I am tall as a Viking of old and handsome as a young Norse god is pretty talk in the selling of my product. But I deplore its intrusion into the personality of this my recorded narrative. And so now, for preface, to all my audience I do give earnest assurance that Greg Haljan is no conceited zebra, handsomely striped by nature and proud of it. Not so. I do beg you to believe, a very humble fellow, striving for your approval, hoping only to entertain you. My introduction. My name is Greg Haljan. My age is 25 years. I was, at the time my narrative begins, third officer on the spaceship Planetara. Our line was newly established in 2070, to be exact, following the modern improvements of the Martel magnetic levitation. Then there's a footnote, which I'm going to read all the footnotes at once when we get to wherever the heck they put the footnotes. Unless I click on it. What happens when I click on the footnote? Oh, I go to the footnotes. Oops. Everybody's favorite. Let's back up. Hang on. Let me find my place here. Oh, jeez. This is why we have trouble with e-readers. Let's see. We'll skip past all the stuff we read last week. Hang on. No, don't open the dictionary. Open the chapter menu. Brigands of the Moon. There we go. And then, so I will read all the footnotes. The footnotes seem to be at the end of something, so I'll just read all the footnotes at the end, and hopefully we can remember what they are. If someone's feeling particularly determined, they could lop out. I'll pause and let it so you can, I'll pause and, give you a moment to, you know, cut the audio and throw the footnote in there. If you're feeling particularly determined, go right ahead. I'm not about to do that, because then I would have to remember timestamps, and I can barely remember my own name. Anyway, continuing on. Our ship, whose home port was Great New York, carried mail and passenger traffic to and from both Venus and Mars. Of astronomical necessity, our flights were irregular. This spring, with the two other planets both close to the Earth, we were making 2 complete round trips. We had just arrived in Great New York this May evening from Grepar, Venus Free State. With only 5 hours in port here, we were departing the same night as the 0 hour for Ferrok-Shahn, capital of the Martian Union. Hang on, I just had a brainwave. So, we're reading sci-fi stories, right? Give me a moment to pull up some neat background noise. Because, sometimes you need neat background noise. Someone can yell if the background noise is distracting. But, I'm just gonna throw in some spacey space sounds. If they'll load. Alright, is that coming across in my system audio? Yeah, that's coming across in my system audio. Someone yell if that's way too loud. I can turn it down. Anyway, now we have space sounds to go with our space book. We were no sooner at the landing stage than I had found a code flash summoning Dan Dean and I to Divisional Detective Headquarters. Dan Snap Dean was one of my closest friends. He was the radio helio operator of the Planetara. A small, wiry, red-headed chap with a quick, ready laugh and a wit that made everyone like him. Oh, I just realized this won't come across in the recording. Oh well, the live stream gets several quirks, I guess. The live stream gets at least 2 whole perks. Everybody's favorite. Yeah, Rezzy knows exactly what I'm using to do this with. And, it's handy. I'll link it in the description. So you can, turn it on when I say I turn it on in the recording if you feel so inclined. Anyway. The summons to Detective Colonel Halsey's office surprised me, and Snap eyed me. You haven't been open any treasury vaults, have you, Greg? Well, he wants you also. Well, he can roar at me like a traffic switchman, and my private life will still be my own. Can I turn it down a smidge? Yes, I can. Is this enough? Yeah, it does seem a little loud. This is probably a better level. Just yell if you need it to be quieter. We couldn't think why we should be wanted. It was darkness of mid-evening when we left the planetaria for Halsey's office. It wasn't a long trip. We went direct in the upper monorail, descending into the subterranean city at Park Circle 30. We'd never been to Halsey's office before. We found it to be a gloomy, vault-like place in one of the deepest corridors, and the door lifted. Greg Haljan. Wait, no, this is the boss. Greg Haljan and Daniel Dean. The guard stood aside. Come in. I own that my heart was unduly thumping as we entered. The door dropped behind us, and it was a small, blue-lit apartment. A steel-lined room, like a vault. Colonel Halsey sat at his desk, and the big, heavy-set, florid Captain Carter, our commander of the Planetaria, was here. And that surprised us. We hadn't seen him leave the ship. Halsey smiled at us gravely, and Captain Carter said, "Sit down, lads." We took our seats. There was an alarming solemnity about this. If I had been guilty of anything that I could think of, it would have been frightening. But Halsey's first words reassured me. It's about the Grand Line Moon expedition. In spite of our secrecy, the news has gotten out. We want to know how. Can you tell us? Captain Carter's huge bulk, he was about as tall as I am, towered over us as we sat before Halsey's desk. If you lads have told anyone, said anything, let's slip the slightest hint about it. Snap smiled with relief, but he turned solemn at once. I haven't, not a word. Nor have I. The Grand Line Moon expedition. We hadn't thought of that as a reason for this summons. Johnny Grantline was a close friend to us both. He organized an exploring expedition to the moon. Uninhabited, with its bleak, forbidding, airless, waterless surface, the moon, even though so close to the Earth, was seldom visited. No regular ship ever stopped there, and a few exploring parties of recent years had come to grief. But there was a persistent rumor that upon the moon, mineral riches of fabulous wealth were awaiting discovery. The thing had already caused some interplanetary complications. The aggressive Martians would be only too glad to explore the moon, but the USW definitely warned them away. There's a footnote about the USW. We'll read that. The moon was world territory, we announced, and we would protect it as such. The threatened conflict between Earth and Mars had come to nothing. There was, this year of 2079, a thorough amity between all three of the inhabited planets. It still holds, and I pray that it may always hold. There was, nevertheless, a realization by our government that whatever riches might be upon the moon should be seized at once and held by some reputable Earth company. And when Johnny Grantline applied with his father's wealth and his own scientific record of attainment, the government was only too glad to grant him his writ. The Grantline expedition had started 6 months ago. The Martian government had acquiesced in our ultimatum, and yet brigands had been known to be financed under cover of a governmental disavowal. And so the expedition was kept secret. My words need give no offense to any Martian who comes upon them. I refer to the history of our Earth only. The Grantline expedition was on the moon now, and no word had come from it. One could not flash helios, even in code, without letting all the universe know that explorers were on the moon. And why they were there, anyone could easily guess. And now Colonel Halsey was telling us that the news was abroad. Captain Carter eyed us closely. His flashing eyes under the white bushy brows could pry a secret from anyone.
You're sure? A girl of Venus, perhaps, with her cursed seductive lure. A chance word with you lads, befuddled by alcoholite?
We assured him we'd been careful. By the heavens, I knew I had been. Not a whisper, even a snap of the name Grantline in 6 months or more. Captain Carter added abruptly,
We're insulated here, Halsey.
Yes, talk freely as you like. An eavesdropping ray will never get into these walls.
They questioned us for a while. They were satisfied at last that, though the secret had escaped, we hadn't done it. Hearing it discussed, it occurred to me to wonder why Carter was concerned. I wasn't aware that he knew of Grantline's venture. I learned now. Oh, excuse me, I have to stretch. Should have done that between chapter breaks there, oh well. They questioned us. They were satisfied at last that, though the secret had escaped, we hadn't done it. Hearing it discussed, it occurred to me to wonder why Carter was concerned. I wasn't aware that he knew of Grantline's venture. I knew now the reason why the Planetara, upon each of her voyages, had managed to pass fairly close to the moon. It had been arranged with Grantline that if he wanted help or had any important message, he was to flash it locally to our passing ship. And this Snap knew. It never even mentioned it. Even to me, for that matter. Halsey was saying,
Well, we can't blame you, but the secret's out.
Snap and I regarded each other. What can anyone do? What would anyone dare do? Captain Carter said abruptly,
Look here, lads. This is my chance now to talk plainly to you. Outside, anywhere outside these walls, an eavesdropping ray may be upon us. You know that? One may never even dare whisper since that accursed ray was developed.
Snap opened his mouth to speak, but decided against it, and my heart was pounding.
I know I can trust you two more than anyone else under me on the Planetara.
What do you mean by that? What?
Nothing at all, but what I say.
What he means, Haljan, is that these things are not what they seem these days. One cannot always tell a friend from an enemy. The Planetara is a public vessel, after all. You have, how many is it, Carter? 30 or 40 passengers this trip?
38.
There are 38 people listed to the flight to Ferrok-Shan tonight. And some may not be what they seem. He raised his thin, dark hand. We have information. I confess, we almost know nothing, hardly more than enough to alarm us.
I want you and Dean to be on your guard. Once on the Planetara, it's difficult for us to talk openly, but be watchful. I will arrange for us to be doubly armed.
What vague, perturbing words. Halsey continued, They tell me George Prince is listed for the voyage. I'm suggesting, Haljan, that you keep your eye especially upon him. Your duties on the Planetara leave you comparatively free, don't they? Well, yes. With the first and second officers on duty and the captain aboard, my routine was more or less that of an understudy. George Prince. Who is he?
A mechanical engineer.
Thank you, Windows, for that sound. Everybody's favorite. Update Adobe Reader. Yeah, I'll do that later.
A mechanical engineer. An under-official of the Earth Federated Radium Corporation. But he associates with bad companions, particularly Martians.
I'd never heard of George Price, though I was familiar with the Federated Radium Corporation. It was a semi-government trust, which controlled virtually the entire Earth supply of radium.
He was in the automotive department. You've heard of the Federated Radium Motor?
Well, we had, of course. It was a pretty recent Earth invention, which promised to revolutionize the automotive industry. An engine of a new type, using radium as its fuel. What in the stars has that got to do with Johnny Grantline? Much, or perhaps nothing. George Price, some years ago, mixed in some rather unethical transactions. We had him in custody once. He's known now as unusually friendly, with several Martians in New York of bad reputation. Well, what you don't know is that Grantline expects to find radium on the moon. We gasped. No! Radium on the moon? Helium-3 is more likely, honestly. At least, from what I know of the moon. Exactly. The ill-fated balloon expedition thought they'd found it on the moon some years ago. A new type of ore, as rich in radium as our gold-bearing sands are rich in gold. Balloon's balanced first samples gave uranium atoms with a fair representation of ionium and thorium, a richly radioactive ore. A load of the pure radium is there somewhere, without a doubt. Shoutouts to the huge negative number on hours to go for the backup drive donation goal. Anyway, he added vehemently, "Do you understand now why we should be suspicious of this George Price? He has a criminal record and a thorough technical knowledge of radium ores. He associates with Martians of bad reputation at that. And a large Martian company has recently developed a radium engine to compete with our Earth motor. You know that? You know there is very little radium available on Mars, and our government will not allow our own radium supply to be exported. That Martian company needs radium. It'll do anything to get the radium. What do you suppose it'll pay for a few tons of really rich radioactive ore, such as Grantline may have found on the moon?" But that's a reputable Martian company. It's backed by the government of the Martian Union. The government of Mars wouldn't dare.
No, of course not. Not openly, but if Martian brigands had a supply of radium, I don't imagine where it came from would make much difference. The Martian company would buy it.
And George Prince, my agents inform me, seems to know that Grantline is on the moon. Put it all together, lads. Little sparks show the hidden current.
More than that, George Prince knows that we have arranged to have the Planetara stop at the moon and bring back Grantline's radium ore. This is your last voyage this year. You'll hear from Grantline this time, we're convinced. He'll probably give you the signal as you pass the moon on your way out. Coming back, you'll stop at the moon and transport whatever radium ore Grantline has ready. The Grant Line flyer is too small for ore transport.
Halsey's voice turned grimly sarcastic. Doesn't it seem queer that George Prince and a few of his Martian friends happen to be listed as passengers for this voyage? In the silence that followed, Snap and I regarded each other. Halsey added abruptly, "We had George Prince typed that time. We arrested him 4 years ago. I'll show him to you." He snapped open an alcove and said to his waiting attendant, "Get me the type of George Prince." The disc in a moment came through the pneumatic, and Halsey, smiling wryly, adjusted it. "A nice-looking fellow, nicely spoken, though at the time we made this he was somewhat annoyed, naturally. He's older now, 29 to be exact. Here he is." The image glowed on the grids before us. His name, George Prince, in letters illumined upon his forehead, showed for a moment and then faded. He stood smiling sourly before us as he repeated the official formula.
My name is George Price. I was born in Great New York, 25 years ago.
I gazed at this life-size, moving image of George Price. He stood, somber in the black detention uniform. A dark, almost girlishly handsome fellow, well below medium height. The rod beside him showed 5 feet 4 inches. Slim and slight. Long, wavy black hair falling about his ears. A pale, clean-cut, really handsome face, almost beardless. I regarded it closely. A face that would have been femininely beautiful without its masculine touch of heavy black brows and firmly set jaw. His voice as he spoke was low and soft, but at the end, with the concluding words, "I am innocent," it flashed into strong masculinity. His eyes, shaded with long, girlish black lashes, by chance met mine. "I'm innocent." His curving, sensuous lips drew down into a grim sneer, and the type faded at its end. Halsey replaced the disc in its box and waved the attendant away. "Thank you." He turned back to Snap and me. "There he is. We have nothing tangible against him now, but I'll say this, he's a clever fellow, one to be afraid of. I wouldn't blare it from the newscaster's microphone, obviously, but if he's hatching any plot, he's been too clever for my agents." We talked for another half hour, and then Captain Carter dismissed us. We left Halsey's office with Carter's final words ringing in our ears.
Whatever comes, lads, remember, I trust you.
Excuse me. It's only 4 p.m. I shouldn't be that tired, should I? I must admit, it's kind of tempting to take a tea break at some point during the proceedings here. I'll consider it. Snap and I decided to walk a portion of the way back to the ship. It was barely more than a mile through this subterranean corridor to where we could get the vertical lift direct to the landing stage. We started off on the lower level. Once outside the insulation of Halsey's office, we didn't dare talk of the thing. Not only the electrical ears, but every possible eavesdropping device might be upon us. The corridor was 200 feet or more below the ground level. At this hour of the night, the business section was completely deserted. The through tubes sounded over our heads with the passing of an occasional train, and the ventilators buzzed and whirred. At the cross intersections, the traffic directors dozed at their posts. It was hot and sticky down here, and gloomy with the daylight globes extinguished, and only the night lights to give it dim illumination. The stores and office arcades were all closed and deserted, only an occasional nightlight burning behind their windows. Our footfalls echoed on the metal grids as we hurried along. Nice evening. Yes, isn't it? I felt oppressed, as though prying ears and eyes were here. We walked for a time in silence, each of us busy with the memory of what had transpired in Halsey's office. Suddenly, Snap gripped at me. "What's that?" Where? We stopped at a corner, and an entryway was here. Snap pulled me into it, and I could feel him quivering with excitement. What is it? We're being followed. You hear anything? No. And yet, now I thought I could hear something. Vague footfalls, a rustling, and a microscopic electrical whine, as though some device were near us. Snap was fumbling in his pocket. Wait a minute. I got a pair of low-scale phones. He put the little pad against his ear. I could hear the sharp intake of his breath. Then he seized me, pulled me down to the metal floor of the entryway. Back, Greg, get back. I could barely hear his whisper. We crouched as far back into the doorway as we could get. I was armed. My official permit for the carrying of the pencil heat ray allowed me to always have it with me, and I drew it now. But there wasn't anything to shoot at. I felt Snap clamping the grids on my ears, and now I heard something. An intensification of the vague footsteps that I thought I had heard before. There was something following us, something out in the corridor there now. A streetlight was nearby. The corridor was dim, but plainly visible, and to my sight it was empty. But there was something there, something invisible. I could hear it moving, creeping towards us. I pulled the phones off my ears. You got a local phone, right? Yes, I'll get them to give us the street glare. I pressed the danger signal, giving our location to the nearest operator. In a second or two, we got the light. The street and all this neighborhood burst into a brilliant actinic glare. The thing menacing us was revealed. A figure in a black cloak, crouching 30 feet away across the corridor. Snap was on his feet. His voice rang shrilly. There it is! Give it a shot, Greg! Snap was unarmed, but he flung his hands out menacingly. The figure, which may perhaps not have been aware of our city safeguard, was taken wholly by surprise. A human figure, 7 feet tall at least, and therefore, I judged, doubtless a Martian man. The black cloak covered his head, and he took a step toward us, hesitated, and then turned in confusion. So if that wasn't clear, what just happened was he had a local phone, right? So he hits the equivalent of 911, and a couple moments later, every light in the vicinity burst into full daytime light so they could see what was going on. That's a really clever, safeguard. I like it. Snap's shrill voice was bringing help. The whine of a street guard's alarm whistle nearby sounded. But the figure was still making off. My pencil ray was in my hand, and I gripped at the switch. The tiny heat ray stabbed through the glare, but I missed. The figure stumbled, but he didn't fall. I saw a bare gray arm come from the cloak, flung up to maintain its balance. Or perhaps my pencil ray of heat had seared the arm? The gray-skinned arm of a Martian. Snap was shouting, "Give him another!" But the figure passed beyond the actinic glare and vanished. We were detained in the turmoil of the corridor for 10 minutes or more with official explanations. Then a message from Halsey released us. The Martian who had been following us in his invisible cloak was never caught. We escaped from the crowd at last, and made our way back to the Planetara, where the passengers were already assembling for the outward Martian voyage. Oh, jeez. Excuse me. Give me a moment to stretch. Grab some water. Oh, apparently have hiccups. My favorite. Give me a moment to stretch out my back and all that. Can't be sitting too long in one position, you know? Not good for you. Gonna grab some water and then start the next chapter. Also, I'm going to take this time to point out that if you're watching this on Twitch rather than the stream VOD, I have a donation jar. It exists. There's a link to it. I think you can click the tips button, and it should being the operative word there, it should come up. You should get a notification on the stream and everything. Real fancy, like, you know, like them their large streamers do. There's a donation goal that's kind of just there. You're under no obligation to, you know, say anything or donate any money. But you see that little cup above my head? You'll get something into the cup. Every time someone follows, they get one of my little goofy faces in the cup, and then when people donate, there's coins into the cup. I'm working on trying to find a good image for for the actual, like, money rather than using the default coins. I'm kind of tempted to use the... Ooh, hi there, voice crack. I'm kind of tempted to use the Bejeweled jewels. Just have them, like, randomly pick. Or maybe just pick 2 or 3 of the Bejeweled jewels that just come up. I'm sure I could do that. Or maybe Tetris pieces? I'm not sure. I just say Bejeweled or Tetris because those are 2 games I really enjoy. I don't know. Well, it's a work in progress. Anyway, continuing on. Let's grab one last drink of water and then start into Chapter 2, shall we? Chapter 2, A Fleeting Glance. I stood on the turret balcony of the Planetara with Captain Carter and Dr. Frank, the ship's surgeon, watching the arriving passengers. It was close to the 0 hour. The level of the stage was a turmoil of confusion. The escalators with the last of the freight aboard were folded back. But the stage was jammed with the incoming passenger baggage. The interplanetary customs and tax officials with their X-ray and Z-ray paraphernalia, and the passengers themselves lined up for export inspection. At this height, the city lights lay spread in a glare of blue and yellow beneath us. The individual local planes came dropping like birds to our stage. And despite 38 passengers for this flight to Mars, that accursed desire of every friend and relative to speed the departing Voyager brought 100 or more extra people to crowd our girders and bring added difficulty to everybody. Carter was too absorbed in his duties to stay with us long, but here in the turret, Dr. Frank and I found ourselves, at the moment, with nothing much to do but watch. Think we'll get away on time, Greg? No, and this of all voyages... I checked myself with thumping heart. My thoughts, rather. Not hearts, he's not a Time Lord. My thoughts were so full of what Halsey and Carter had told us that it was difficult to rein my tongue. And yet here in the turret, unguarded by insulation, I could say nothing. Nor would I have dared mention the Grant Line Moon Expedition to Dr. Frank. For that matter, I wondered what he knew of this affair. Perhaps as much as I, and yet perhaps nothing. He was a thin, dark, rather smallish man of 50, the ship's surgeon, trim in his blue and white uniform. I knew him well. We had made several flights together. An American, I fancy of Jewish ancestry. A likable man and a good, skillful doctor and a surgeon. He and I had always been close friends.
It's crowded. Johnson says 38. I hope they're experienced travelers. This pressure sickness is a rotten nuisance, keeping me dashing around all night, assuring frightened women they're not going to die. Last voyage coming out of the Venus atmosphere. He plunged into a lugubrious account of his troubles with space-sick voyagers. Okay, I know lugubrious is a word, I've never learned what it means. Lugubrious. Looking or sounding sad and dismal. See noted glum. Alright. It's a good word. Take notes, everybody. Word of the day, lugubrious. Because it's a little gloomy outside. Well, what most people will consider gloomy. I just think it's nice. Kind of Seattle-esque. Around here. Anyway. But I was in no mood to listen to his woes.
My gaze was down on the spider incline, up which, over the bend of the ship's sleek silvery body, the passengers and their friends were coming in little groups. The upper deck was already jammed with them. The Planetara, as flyers go, wasn't really a large vessel. Cylindrical of body, 40 feet maximum beam and 255 feet in overall length. The passenger superstructure, no more than 100 feet long, was set amidships. A narrow deck, metallic enclosed and with bullseye windows, encircled the superstructure. Some of the cabins opened directly onto the deck, and yet others had doors to the interior corridors. There were half a dozen small but luxurious public rooms. The rest of the vessel was given to freight storage and the mechanism and control compartments. Forward of the passenger structure, the deck level continued under the cylindrical dome roof to the bow. The forward watchtower observatory is here, along with the officers' cabins, Captain Carter's navigating rooms, and Dr. Frank's office. Similarly, under the stern dome was the stern watchtower and a series of power compartments. Above the superstructure, a confusion of spider bridges, ladders, and balconies were laced like a metal network. The turret in which Frank and I stood was perched here, and 50 feet away, like a bird's nest, Snap's instrument room stood clinging to the metal bridge. The dome roof, with the glassite windows rolled back now, rose in a mound peak to cover this highest middle portion of the vessel. Below, in the main hall, blue-lit metal corridors ran the entire length of the ship. Freight storage compartments, gravity control rooms, air renewal systems, heaters and ventilators and pressure mechanisms. They were all located there. In the kitchens, stewards' compartments, and the living quarters of the crew. We carried a crew of 16, excluding the navigating officers and the purser, Snap Dean, and Dr. Frank. The passengers coming aboard seemed a fair representation of what we usually had for the outward voyage to Ferrok-Shan. Most were Earth people and returning Martians. Dr. Frank pointed out one, a huge Martian in a gray cloak, a big 7-foot fellow. His name is Set Miko. Ever heard of him? No. Should I? Well, the doctor suddenly checked himself as though he were sorry he had spoken. I never heard of him. An awkward silence fell suddenly between us. There were a few Venus passengers, too. I saw one of them presently coming up the incline and recognized her. A girl, traveling alone. We'd brought her from Grebar, last voyage but one. I remembered her. An alluring sort of girl, as most of them are. Her name was Venza. She spoke English well. A singer and a dancer who had been imported to great New York to fill some theatrical engagement. She'd made quite a hit on the Grand White Way. She came up the incline with the carrier ahead of her. Gazing up, she saw Dr. Frank and I at the turret window and waved her arm in greeting and flashed us a smile. By the gods of the airways, there's Alta Venza! You saw that look, Greg? That was for me, not for you. Reasonable enough, but I doubt it. The Venza was nothing if not impartial. I wondered what could be taking Venza now to Mars. I was glad to see her. She was diverting, educated, well-traveled, spoke English with a colloquial, theatrical manner, more characteristic of great New York than of Venus. And for all her light banter, I would rather put my trust in her than any other Venus girl that I'd ever met. The hum of the departing siren was sounding. Friends and relatives of the passengers were crowding the exit incline, and the deck was clearing. I hadn't seen George Price come aboard, and then I thought I saw him down on the landing stage, just arrived from a private tube car. A small, slight figure. The customs men were around him. I could really only see his head and shoulders. Pale, girlishly handsome face, long, black hair to the base of his neck. He was bareheaded, with the hood of his traveling cloak pulled back. That's one thing I'm surprised has not, come back fashion-wise. is just like cloaks and capes as fashion because they're so over the top and it's so totally something like my generation would wear. I personally like if it became a fashion trend, I'd be so ready for it. I'd be super down like that kind of you know how you just throw on a hoodie as you're leaving the house? Like just throw on a cloak instead. Totally would. It looks cool. And in fairness, when it's like around Halloween, sometimes they do that. I'm just like, yep, it's Halloween. It's socially acceptable. I'm wearing this out instead of my jacket today. Anyway, I digress. I stared and saw that Dr. Frank was also gazing. Excuse me, sorry. I stared and saw that Dr. Frank was also gazing down, but neither of us spoke. Then I said, upon impulse, "Suppose we go down to the deck, Doctor." He acquiesced to my suggestion, and we descended to the lower room of the turret, and clambered down the spider ladder to the upper deck level. The head of the arriving incline was near us, and it was preceded by two carriers who were littered with hand baggage, George Prince coming up the incline behind them. He was closer now, and I recognized him from the type we'd seen in Halsey's office. And then with a shock I saw it was not so. This was a girl coming aboard. An arch light over the incline showed her clearly when she was halfway up. A girl with her hood pushed back, her face framed in thick black hair. I saw now it was not a man's cut of hair, but long braids coiled up under the dangling hood. Dr. Frank must have remarked my amazed expression. "Little beauty, isn't she?" "Who is she?" We were standing back against the wall of the superstructure, and a passenger was near us, the Martian whom Dr. Frank had called Miko. He was loitering here, quite evidently watching this girl come aboard, but as I glanced at him, he looked away and casually sauntered off. The girl came up and reached the deck. "I'm in A22. My brother came aboard about 2 hours ago." Dr. Frank answered my whisper. "That's Anita Price." She was passing quite close to us on the deck, following the carrier, when she stumbled and very nearly fell. I was nearest to her, and so I leapt forward and caught her as she went down. "Oh my!" With my arm about her, I raised her up and set her upon her feet again. She'd twisted her ankle, and yet balanced herself upon it. The pain of it eased up in a moment. "I'm all right, thank you." In the dimness of the blue-lit deck, I met her eyes. I was holding her with an encircling arm. She was small and soft against me. Her face, framed in the thick black hair, smiled up at me. And a small oval face, beautiful, yet firm of chin and stamped with the mark of its own individuality. No empty-headed beauty, this. "I'm all right, thank you very much." I became conscious, rather suddenly, that I hadn't released her, and I felt her hands pushing at me. Then it seemed for an instant she yielded and was clinging, and I met her startled, upflung gaze. Eyes like a purple night with a sheen of misty starlight in them. I heard myself murmuring, "I beg your pardon. Yes, of course," as I released her. She thanked me again and followed the carrier along the deck. She was limping slightly from the twisted ankle. An instant while she had clung to me and I had held her. A brief flash of something from her eyes to mine, and from mine back to hers. The poets write that love can be born of such a glance. The first meeting across all the barriers of which love springs unsought, unbidden, defiant sometimes. And the troubadours of old would sing, "A fleeting glance, a touch, two wildly beating hearts, and love was born." I think with Anita in me, it must have been like that. I stood gazing after her, unconscious of Dr. Frank, who was watching me with his humorous smile. And presently, no more than a quarter beyond the 0 hour, the Planetara got away. With the dome windows battened tightly, we lifted from the landing stage and soared over the glowing city. The phosphorescence of the electronic tubes was like a comet's tail behind us, as we slid upward. At the twilight hour, the heat of our atmospheric passage was over, and all the passengers had retired. The ship was quiet, with empty decks and dim, silent corridors. Vibrationless, with the electronic engines cut off and only the hum of the Martel magnetizers to break the unnatural stillness. We were well beyond the Earth's atmosphere, heading out in the cone path of the Earth's shadow, in the direction of the moon. So I'm going to take a short break and make some tea, and then we'll get back in with Chapter 3 in the Helio Room. So I shall return. I would firmly suggest that everyone get up, do some stretches, get that blood moving again. If you've been sitting like I have, it's been an hour, so gotta keep moving. Yep, tea. I'm gonna make some tea box tea, my monthly box that I get for tea. So I'm gonna throw up the be right back, and I'm gonna mute my mic. I'm gonna leave the space noises on because I like the way they sound. But I shall return with a cup of tea. Alright. Let's turn the microphone back on. The microphone is back on. Yes. Hello. Hello, hello. Y'all can hear me still, right? How'd you enjoy that good 10 minutes of space noise? Oh, it takes a little bit for the water to heat up and all that. But anyway, let's, now that we have our tea, which one moment, I grabbed what's in it so I can tell you, in case you care. I didn't at all leave camera. 0% happened. So this tea today, it's a green rooibos with lemon myrtle, spearmint, apple, pineapple, cinnamon, ginger, rose hips, lemon verbena, and licorice root. It's called Right as Rain. I don't know how I feel about the apple and pineapple in there, but the rest of that, was good. Unfortunately, the fruit in there means you can really only steep it once. Some teas, you can steep 2 or 3 times. But it smells good, so it's a little heavy on the lemon-based things with the lemon myrtle and the lemon verbena. But, a little lemon doesn't hurt anybody. See, you're on about the licorice not being good. Well, I'm just gonna have to disagree with you. I love licorice. I had a thing of licorice root tea that I would drink when I'm like, I'm feeling a decaf feel right now. Anyway, let's return to Chapter 3 now that we've waited long enough. Chapter 3, in the Helio Room. At 6 a.m. Earth Eastern Time, which we were still carrying, Snapdean and I were alone in his instrument room, perched in the network over the Planetara's deck. The bulge of the dome enclosed us. It rounded like a great observatory window some 20 feet above the ceiling of this little metal cubbyhole, rather. The Planetara was still in the Earth's shadow. The firmament, black interstellar space with its blazing white, red, and yellow stars, lay spread around us. The moon, with nearly all its disk illumined, hung, a great silver ball, over our bow quarter. And behind it, to one side, Mars floated like the red tip of a smoldering cigarillo in the blackness. The Earth, behind our stern, was dimly, redly visible, a giant sphere etched with configurations of its oceans and continents. Upon one limb, a touch of the sunlight hung on the mountain tops, with a crescent red-yellow sheen. And then we plunged from the cone shadow. The sun, with a leaping corona, burst through the blackness behind us. The Earth lighted into a huge, thin crescent with hooked cusps. Hooked cusps. Yes, it's time to wait an hour until you can drink the tea. Rip. Yeah, big mood. Or I could just, scald the heck out of my mouth and try and drink it now. Which, entertainment, I guess. To Snap and me, the glories of the heavens were too familiar to be remarked upon. And this voyage in particular, we were in no mood to consider them. I had been in the Helio Room several hours. When the Planetara started, and my few routine duties were over, I could think of nothing save Halsey's and Carter's admonition.
Be on your guard, and particularly watch George Price.
I hadn't seen George Price, but I'd seen his sister, whom Carter and Halsey hadn't bothered to mention, and my heart was still pounding with the memory. When the passengers had retired and the ship quieted, I prowled through the passenger corridors. This was about the tri-night hour. Just another footnote about the tri-night hour. We'll give it a moment, in case you want to splice in something about the tri-night hour right now. Alright. Hot as the corridors of hell, with our hull and the glassite dome seething with the friction of our atmospheric flight. But the refrigerators mitigated that, the ventilators blasting cool air from the renewers in every corner of the vessel. Within an hour or two, with the cold of space striking us, it was hot air that was needed. Dr. Frank evidently was having little trouble with pressure sick passengers. There's another footnote about pressure sickness. Alright. The Planetara's equalizers were fairly efficient. I'm assuming pressure sickness is kind of like altitude sickness broadly. Like that feeling you get on a plane when like you have to pop your ears and stuff, but to a worse degree, I would assume. I didn't encounter Dr. Frank, however. I prowled through the silent metal lounges and passages. I prowled through the silent metal lounges and passages. I went to the door of A22. It was on the deck level, in a tiny transverse passage just off the main lounging room. Its name grid glowed with the letters Anita Price, rather. I stood in my short white trousers and white silk shirt, like a cabin steward gawping. Anita Price. I'd never heard the name until this night, but there was magic music in it now, as I murmured it to myself. Anita Price. She was here, doubtless asleep, behind this small metal door. It seemed as though that little oval grid was the gateway to a fairyland of my dreams. I turned away and thought of the Great Line Moon Expedition. stabbed at me. George Price, Anita's brother, whom I'd been told to watch, this renegade associate of dubious Martians, plotting heavens knows what. I saw upon the adjoining door, A20, George Price. And I listened. In the humming stillness of the ship's interior, there was no sound from these cabins. A20 was without windows, but Anita's room had a window, and a door which gave upon the deck. I went through the lounge out its arch, and walked the deck length. The deck door and window of A22 were closed, and dark. The 10-foot wide deck was dim with white starlight from side ports. Chairs were here, but they were all empty. From the bow windows of the arching dome, a flood of moonlight threw long, slanting shadows through the deck. At the corner where the superstructure ended, I thought I saw a figure lurking, as though watching me, but when I went that way, it vanished. I turned the corner, went the width of the ship to the other side. There was no one in sight save the observer and his spider bridge, high in the bow network, and the second officer, on duty on the turret balcony, almost directly over me. As I stood and listened, I suddenly heard footsteps, and from the direction of the bow, a figure came. Purser Johnson.
Cooling off, Greg?
Yes. He went past me and turned into the smoking room door behind me, nearby. Words. They're hard. I'm trying to pour water into my water bottle right now. See, this is why we focus, because I can't read and do another thing at the same time, sometimes, maybe, possibly. Anyway, I told myself, He turned past me and went into the smoking room door nearby. Well, about that, there's not smoking now. There's hardly smoking now, let alone in 2080. I stood a moment at one of the deck windows, gazing at the stars, and for no reason at all, realized I was tense. Johnson was a great one for his regular sleep. It was wholly unlike him to be roaming about the ship at such an hour. Had he been watching me? I told myself it was nonsense. I was suspicious of everyone. Everything. This voyage was getting to me. I heard another step, and Captain Carter appeared from his chart room, which stood in the center of the narrowing, open deck space near the bow, and I joined him at once.
Who was that?
Johnson.
Oh, yes.
He fumbled in his uniform, and his gaze swept the moonlit deck.
Greg, take this.
He handed me a small metal box, and I stuffed it at once into my shirt.
An insulator. Snap is in his office. Take it to him, Greg. Stay with him. You'll have a measure of security, and you can help him to make the photographs. I won't be with you. No use making it look as though we were doing anything unusual. If your graphs show anything, or if Snap picks up any message, bring it to me.
Well, it'll be cool enough presently, Greg.
With that, he sauntered away toward his chart room. By heavens, what a relief, Snap murmured as the current went on. We'd wired his cubby with the insulator, and within its barrage we could at least talk with a degree of freedom. You've seen George Prince, Greg? No, he's assigned A20, but I saw his sister. Snap, no one ever mentioned... Snap had heard of her, but he hadn't known that she was listed for this voyage. A real beauty, so I've heard. Cursed shame for a decent girl to have a brother like that. I could agree with him there, but I didn't make any comment. And soon enough it was 6 a.m. Snap had been busy all night with the routine Cosmo radios from the Earth following our departure. He had a pile of them beside him. Many were for the passengers, but anything that savored of a code was barred. Nothing strange looking? No, not a thing. We were at this time no more than some 65,000 miles from the moon's surface. The Planetaria would presently swing upon her direct course for Mars. There was nothing that could cause passenger comment in this close passing of the moon. Normally we use the satellite's attraction to give us additional starting speed. It was now or never that a message would come from Grantline. He was supposed to be on the earthward side of the moon, and while Snap had rushed through with his routine, I had searched the moon's surface with our glass, as I knew Carter was searching it, and also the observer in his tower, very possibly. But there was nothing. Copernicus and Kepler lay in full sunlight. The heights of the lunar mountains, the depths of the barren empty seas were etched black and white, clear and clean. Grim, forbidding desolation, this unchanging moon. In romance, moonlight may shimmer and sparkle to light a lover's smile, but the reality of the moon is that it's cold and bleak. There was nothing to show my prying eyes where the intrepid Grantline might be. Nothing at all, Snap. And Snap's heliometers, attuned for an hour now, to pick up the faintest signal, were motionless. If he's concentrated any appreciable amount of radioactive ore, we should get an impulse from its gamma rays. And yet our receiving shield was dark, untouched. We tried taking hydrogen photographic impressions of the visible moon surface. A sequence of them, with stereoscopic lenses 48 to the second. Our mirror grid gave the magnified images. The spectroheliograph, with its wavelength selection, pictured the mountain levels and slowly descended into the deepest seas. And yet there was nothing. In these moon caverns, a million recesses, amid the crags of that tumbled, barren surface, the pinpoint of movement which might have been Grantline's expeditions could so easily be hiding. Could he have the ore insulated, fearing its gamma rays would betray its presence to hostile watchers? Or had disaster come to him? He might not be upon this hemisphere of the moon at all. My imagination, sharpened by fancy of a lurking menace which seemed everywhere about the planetaria this voyage, ran rife with fears for Johnny Grantline. He had promised to communicate this voyage. It was now or, well, never. and yet 6:30 came and passed. Oh, jeez, my back cracked a little at that. Oh, sorry. 6:30 had come and passed, and we were well beyond the earth's shadow now. The firmament blazed with its vivid glories, the sun behind us, a ball of yellow-red leaping flames. The earth hung, open to a huge, dull red half-sphere. We were within some 40,000 miles of the moon. A giant white ball, all of its disk visible to the naked eye. It poised over the bow, and presently the Planetara swung upon her course for Mars. It shifted sideways. The light of it glared white and dazzling in our tiny side windows. Snap, with his habitual red celluloid eye shade shoved high on his forehead, worked over our instruments. "Greg!" The receiving shield was glowing a trifle. We were getting gamma rays. It glowed, gleamed phosphorescent, and the audible recorder began sounding its tiny, tinkling murmurs. Gamma rays. Snap sprang to the dials. The direction and strength were soon obvious. A richly radioactive ore body of considerable size was concentrated upon this hemisphere of the moon. It was unmistakable. "He's got it, Greg, The tiny helium mirrors began quivering, and Snap exclaimed triumphantly, "Here he comes! My goodness, the message at last! Bar off that light!" I flung on the absorbers, and the moonlight bathing the little room went into them, and darkness sprang around us. Snap fumbled at his instrument board. Actinic lights showed dimly in the quivering thumbnail mirrors. 2 of them. They hung poised on their cobweb wires, infinitely sensitive to the infrared light rays Grantline was sending from the moon. The mirrors in a moment began swinging. On the scale across the room, the actinic beams from them were magnified into sweeps of light. This is a terrible way to send messages, geez. Also, actinic, of lighter lighting, able to cause photochemical reactions, as in photography, through having a significant short wavelength or ultraviolet component. Also, this is just an awful way to send messages. They're like attuning mirrors to vibrate at the interaction of UV rays. Like, you know how much distortion and like static there would be in any kind of message like that because of the general movement of the area around you? No. That's a bad way to send messages. Anyway. I mean, we use something similar, like just rather than using UV rays, we use, radio waves and have, antenna suck them in. But it's a little less like, it doesn't need to be so darn sensitive. It's just, I don't like that. Good try though. It's a good guess. Like if you didn't consider like the mirrors being forced to move and stuff, because movement. Because movement of the mirror in general, there's gonna be a lot of interference there. Like it's a good theory. I mean, it's kind of generally on the right track to where we are now. Anyway, I digress. Snap spelled it out and decoded it. "Success. Stop for ore on your return voyage. We'll give you our location later. Success beyond our wildest hopes." Suddenly the mirrors hung motionless. The shield, where the gamma rays were bombarding, went suddenly dark. Snap murmured, "That's all. He's got the ore. Success beyond wildest hopes. That must mean an enormous quantity of it is available." We were sitting in darkness, and abruptly I became aware that across our open window, where the insulation barrage was flung, the air was faintly hissing. An interference there. I saw a tiny swirl of purple sparks. Some hostile ray from the deck beneath us, from the spider bridge that led to our little room, someone out there trying to pry in. Snap impulsively reached for the absorbers to let in the outside light. It was all darkness to us outside, but I checked him. "Wait!" I cut off our barrage, opened our door, and stepped to the narrow metal bridge. "Wait, Snap. You stay there." "Well, Snap, I'm going to bed. Glad you cleaned up that patch of work." I banged the door upon him. The lacework of metal bridges and ladders seemed empty, but I gazed up to the dome and forward and aft. 20 feet beneath me was the metal roof of the cabin's superstructure. Below it, both sides of the deck showed. They were all patched with moonlight. No one was visible down there, so I descended a ladder, and the deck was empty. But in the silence, something was moving. Footsteps moving away from me down the deck. I followed, and suddenly I was running, chasing something I could hear, but I couldn't see. It turned into the smoking room, and I burst in, where a real sound smothered the phantom. Johnson the purser was sitting here alone, in the dimness. He was smoking, and I noticed that his cigar held a long, frail ash. It couldn't have been him I was chasing. He was sitting there, quite calmly, for that matter. A thick-necked, heavy fellow, easily out of breath, but he was breathing calmly. He sat up with amazement at my wild-eyed appearance, and the ash jarred from his cigar. "Greg, what the devil?" I tried to grin. I'm on my way to bed. I worked all night helping Snap with those darned Earth messages. I went past him, out the door into the main interior corridor. It was the only way the invisible prowler could have gone. But I was too late now. I could hear nothing. I dashed forward into the main lounge, where it was empty, dim, and silent. A silence broken presently by a faint click. A stateroom door hastily closing. I swung and found myself in a tiny transverse passage. And the twin doors of A22 and A20 were before me. The invisible eavesdropper had gone into one of these rooms. I listened at each of the panels, but there was only silence within. The interior of the ship was suddenly singing with a steward siren, the call to awaken the passengers, and it startled me, so I moved swiftly away. But as the siren shut off in the silence, I heard a soft, musical voice. "Wake up, Anita. That's the breakfast call." "All right, George, I hear it." And so ends Chapter 3 of our intrepid adventure on this spaceship. Question of the day, is this tea cool enough to drink? We're going to find out the answer. Gonna take the lid off of my cup here. Well, it certainly smells delicious. It's still steaming a little, I think, so it may not be drinkable temperature yet. Oh, certainly not. Knowing me, I'm going to be able to drink this when I'm on my way home. I did get a little bit of the tea on my computer. So, wipe that up. It's fine. A little water never hurt your computer, right? This tea does smell good, though. Anyway, let me grab a little bit of water for my throat so I don't, have my voice get upset with me. That's important. And then we'll return to Chapter 4. But I was too... anyway, Chapter 4. A burn on a Martian arm. Ooh, dang. Ooh, serious business. I didn't appear at that morning meal. I was exhausted and drugged with lack of sleep. I had a moment with Snap to tell him what had occurred, and then I sought out Carter. He had his little chart room insulated, and we were cautious. I told him what Snap and I had learned, the gamma rays from the moon, proving that Grantline had concentrated a considerable ore body. I also told him of the message from Grantline.
"We'll stop on the way back as he directs, Greg."
He bent closer to me.
"At Farakshan, I'm going to bring back a cordon of interplanetary police. The secret will be out, of course, once we stop at the moon. We have no right even now to be flying this vessel as unguarded as it is."
He was very solemn and grim when I told him of the invisible eavesdropper.
"You think he overheard Grantline's message?"
I don't know.
"Who was it? You feel it was George Price?"
"Yes. I was convinced the prowler had gone into A20. When I mentioned the purser, who seemed to have been watching me earlier in the night and again was sitting in the smoking room when the eavesdropper fled past, Carter looked startled.
"Johnson's all right, Greg."
Is he? Does he know anything about this Grant Line affair?
No, you haven't mentioned it, have you?
Of course I haven't. I've been wondering why Johnson didn't hear the eavesdropper, though. I could hear him when I was chasing him, but Johnson sat perfectly unmoved and let him go by. What was he sitting there for, anyway, at that hour of the morning?
You're too suspicious, Greg. Overwrought, but you're right. We can't be too careful. I'm going to have that Prince Suite searched when I can catch it unoccupied. Passengers don't ordinarily travel with invisible cloaks. Go to bed, Greg. You need rest.
And with that I went to my cabin. It was located aft on the stern deck space, near the stern watchtower. A small metal room with a desk, a chair, and a bunk. Desk. Chair. Yes, my bed is my desk. Flawless. Desk. Chair. Bunk. I made sure no one was in it, and I sealed the lattice grill and the door, set the alarm to trigger against any opening of them, and went to bed. I happen to have the door locked as well. The siren for the midday meal awakened me, and I'd slept heavily. I felt refreshed and, well, hungry. I found the passengers already assembled at my table when I arrived in the dining salon. It was a low-vaulted metal room of blue and yellow tube lights. At the sides, its oval windows showed the deck, with its ports of dome side, through which a vista of the starry firmament was visible. We were well on our course to Mars. The moon had dwindled to a pinpoint of light beside the crescent Earth, and behind them our sun blazed, visually the largest orb in the heavens. It was some 68 million miles from the Earth to Mars this voyage, a flight under ordinary circumstances of about 10 days. There were 5 tables in the dining salon, each with 8 seats. Snap and I had one of the tables, and we sat at the ends, with 3 passengers on each of the sides. Snap was in his seat when I arrived, and he eyed me down the length of the table. "Good morning, Greg. We missed you at breakfast. Not pressure sick, I hope." There were 3 passengers already seated at my table. All men. Snap, in a happy mood, introduced me. "This is our 3rd officer, Greg Hall John. He's a big, handsome fellow, isn't he? And as pleasant as he is good-looking. Greg, this is Sarawab Han." I met the keen, dark-eyed, somber gaze of a Venus man of middle age. A slim, graceful man with sleek black hair. And his pointed face, accentuated by his pointed beard, was pallid. He wore a white and purple robe. Upon his chest was a huge platinum ornament, a device like a star and a cross entwined. "I'm happy to meet you, sir." "Oh, Han. I should have heard of you, no doubt, but—" A smile plucked at his thin gray lips. "That is the error of mine, not yours. My mission is that all the universe shall hear of me." "He's preaching the religion of the Venus mystics." "And this enlightened gentleman has just termed it fetishism, the ignorance—" "Oh, I say," protested the man at Obhan's side. "I mean, you seem to think I intended something No, I say. I mean, you seem to think I intended something opprobrious. As a matter of fact..." "We're in argument, Greg. This is Sir Arthur Coniston, an English gentleman, lecturer and skytrotter. That is, he will be a skytrotter. He tells us he plans a number of voyages." The tall Englishman... How do I use my words? The tall Englishman, in his white linen suit, bowed acknowledgment. "My compliments, Mr. Hall John. I hope you have no strong religious convictions, else we'll make your table here very miserable." The 3rd passenger had evidently kept out of the argument, and Snap introduced him as Race Rankin, an American, a quiet, blond fellow of 35 or 40. I ordered my breakfast and let the argument go on. "Won't make me miserable. I love an argument, you said, Sir Arthur." "I meant to say I think I said too much. Mr. Rankin, you are more diplomatic." "I am a magician," he said to me. A theatrical entertainer, I deal in tricks how to fool an audience. His keen, amused gaze was on Opan. This gentleman from Venus and I have too much in common to argue.
A nasty one! By Jove, really, Mr. Rankin, you're a bit too cruel.
I could see we were doomed to have turbulent meals in this voyage. I like to eat in quiet. Arguing passengers always did annoy me. There were still 3 seats vacant at our table, and I wondered who would occupy them. And I soon learned the answer for 1 seat at least. Rankin said calmly, "Where's the little Venus go this meal?" His glance went to the empty seat at my right hand. "The Venza, wasn't that her name? She and I are destined for the same theater in Farak Shan." So Venza was to sit beside me. It was good news. 10 days of a religious argument 3 times a day would be intolerable, but the cheerful Venza would help.
She never eats the midday meal. She's on the deck having orange juice. I guess it's the old gag about dying, huh?
My attention wandered about the salon. Most of the seats were occupied. At the captain's table I saw the objects of my search. George Price and his sister sat on one on each side of the captain. I saw George Price in the life, now as a man who looked hardly 25. He was at this moment evidently in a pretty cheerful mood. His clean-cut, handsome profile, with its poetic dark curls, was turned toward me, and there seemed little of the villain about him. And I saw Anita Price now as a dark-haired, black-eyed little beauty, in feature resembling her brother very strongly. She presently finished her meal and rose, with him after her. She was dressed in earth fashion, a white blouse and dark jacket, wide, knee-length trousers of gray with a red sash, her only touch of color. She went past me, flashed her smile, and nodded. When my heart was pounding, I answered her greeting and met George Price's casual gaze. He too smiled, as though to signify that his sister had told him of the service I'd done her. Or was his smile an ironical memory of how he had eluded me this morning when I chased him? I gazed after his small, white-suited figure as he followed Anita from the salon, and thinking of her, I prayed that Carter and Halsey might be wrong. Whatever plotting against the Grant Line expedition might be going on, I hoped George Price was innocent of it. And yet I knew in my heart it was a futile hope. Price had been that eavesdropper outside the Helio room. I couldn't doubt it. But that his sister must be ignorant of what he was doing, that I was sure. My attention was brought suddenly back to the reality of our table, and I heard Obhan's silky voice. We passed quite close to the moon last night, Mr. Dean.
Yeah, we did, didn't we? Always do. It's a technical problem of the exigencies of interstellar navigation. Explain it to them, Greg. You're an expert.
I waved it away with a chuckle, and there was a brief silence. I couldn't help noticing Sir Arthur Coniston's strange look, and think I've never seen so keen a glance as Rance Rackham shot at me. Were all these people aware of Grantline's treasure on the moon? It suddenly seemed so. I wished fervently at that instant that the 10 days of this voyage were over, and we were safely at Farak Shan. Captain Carter was absolutely right. Coming back, we would have a cordon of interplanetary police aboard. Sir Arthur finally broke the awkward silence.
Magnificent sight, the moon, from so close a viewpoint as well. Though I was too much afraid of pressure sickness to be up to see it.
I had nearly finished my hasty meal when another incident shocked me. The 2 other passengers at our table came in and took their seats. A Martian girl and a man. The girl had the seat at my left with the man beside her. All Martians are tall, but this girl was about my own height, that is 6 feet 2. The man was 7 feet or more, and both wore the Martian outer robe. The girl flung hers back, and her limbs were encased in a pseudo-mail. She looked, as all Martians like to look, a very warlike Amazon. But despite this, she was a very pretty girl. She smiled at me with a keen-eyed, direct gaze. Mr. Dean said at breakfast that you were big and handsome. You are. They were brother and sister, these Martians. Snap introduced them as Set Miko and Setamoa. And then there's a footnote. So, give it a little time. Alright, I gave you 10 seconds to splice in that footnote. This Miko was, from our Earth standards, a tremendous, brawny giant. Not spindly like most Martians. All of his 7 feet of height was almost heavy-set with muscle. He wore a plated leather jerkin beneath his robe, and knee pants of leather, out of which his lower legs showed as gray, hairy pillars of strength. He'd come into the salon with a swagger, his sword ornament clinking.
A pleasant voyage so far,
he said to me as he started his meal. His voice had the heavy, throaty rasp characteristic of a Martian, and yet he spoke perfect English. Both Martians and Venus people are by heritage extraordinary linguists. Miko and his sister Moa had some touch of a Martian accent, worn almost away by living for some years in Great New York. The shock came to me within a few minutes. Miko, absorbed in attacking his meal, inadvertently pushed it back his robe to bare his forearm. Oh, excuse me. An instant only, and then it dropped back to his wrist. But in that instant I had seen upon the gray flesh a thin sear turned red, a very recent burn, as though a pencil ray of heat had caught his arm. My mind flung back. Only last night in the city corridor, Snap and I had been followed by a Martian, and I'd shot at him with a heat ray. I thought it had hit him on the arm. Was this the mysterious Martian who had followed us from Halsey's office? Alright, I'm going to take another short break to use the restroom, do a couple things. It's almost been a second hour, so I would firmly suggest getting up, doing some stretches, getting some blood into your legs if you've been sitting down. Sitting still for too long isn't the best thing in the world. And we'll come back with Chapter 5, Venza the Venus Girl. So I will be right back. Okay, let me turn off the BRB on the stream, unmute the microphone, and we can go. Also, good news, everyone. I can actually drink my tea and taste how it is rather than tasting the burning of my mouth flesh. So, that's always a positive. JK. Can slightly taste the burning of my mouth flesh, but I can mostly taste the tea, and it's pretty good. That's about what I expected. Could do with a little more licorice, in my opinion. A little more licorice, a little bit less lemon. Yum, 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 yum. If I can speak English. Anyway, let's continue with Chapter 5. And unless this chapter is particularly short, I think we're going to end it off after Chapter 5 today. Anyway, Chapter 5, Venza, the Venus Girl. It was shortly after that midday meal when I encountered Venza sitting on the starlit deck. I'd been in the bow observatory, taken my routine castings of our position, and worked them out. I was, I think, of the Planetaria's officers, the most expert handler of the mathematical mechanical calculators. The location of our position and charting our trajectory of our course was, under ordinary circumstances, about all I had to do, though, and it really only took a few minutes each 12 hours. I had a moment with Carter in the isolation of his chart room.
This voyage! Greg, I'm getting like you, too fanciful. We've a normal group of passengers, apparently, but I don't like the look of any of them. That old Han at your table.
Yes, he's a snaky-looking fellow. But him and the Englishman are great at arguments. Did you have Price's cabin searched? My breath hung on his answer.
Yes, nothing unusual among his things. We searched both his room and his sister's.
I didn't follow that up, and instead told him about the burn on Miko's thick gray arm. He stared.
I wish to the heavens we were at Ferroc Shan. Greg, tonight when the passengers are asleep, come here to me. Snap will be here, and Dr. Frank. We can trust him.
He knows about the Grantline treasure.
Yes, and so do Balk and Blackstone.
Balk and Blackstone were our first and second officers.
We'll all meet here, Greg. Say about the 0 hour. We must take some precautions.
He suddenly felt he should say no more now. He dismissed me. I found Venza seated alone in a secluded corner of the starlit deck. A porthole with the black heavens and the blazing stars was before her. There was an empty seat nearby. Hola. There's a footnote there. Greg, sit here with me. I've been wondering when you would come after me. I sat down beside her. Where are you going? Going to Mars, Venza? I'm glad to see you. Hang on, I'm gonna bookmark our page so I can come back to it and click on the footnote. And oh dang, the footnotes. There's only 6 footnotes. That was the last footnote. Duly noted. And then show me my notes and marks for this book, if you could. There we go. Go back to that bookmark. Remove bookmark. There we go. Anyway, many thanks. But I am glad to see you, Greg. So handsome a man. Do you know, from Venus to the Earth, and I have no doubt on all of Mars, no man will please me more.
Ha ha. Glib tongue. Born to flatter the male every girl of your world.
And I added more seriously, You didn't answer my question, though. What brings you to Mars? Contract. By the stars, what else? Of course, a chance to make a voyage with you. Don't be silly, Venza. I enjoyed her. I gazed at her small, slim figure gracefully reclining in the deck chair, and her long gray robe parted, by design I have no doubt, to display her shapely, satin-sheathed legs. Her black hair was coiled in a heavy knot at the back of her neck, and her carmine lips were parted with a mocking, alluring smile. An exotic perfume of hers enveloped me, and she glanced at me sideways from beneath her sweeping black lashes. Be serious. I am serious. Sober. Well, intoxicated by you. But sober. What sort of a contract? A theater in Ferroc Shan. Good money, Greg. I'll be there in a year. I'm to be there for a year. She sat up to face me. There's a fellow here on the planetaria. Rance Rankin, he calls himself. At our table, a big, good-looking blonde American. Says he's a magician. Have you ever heard of him? That's what he told me, and no, I haven't heard of him. Nor did I, and I thought I had heard of everyone of any importance. However, he's listed for the same theater where I'm going. Nice sort of fellow. She paused and added suddenly, If he's a professional entertainer, then I'm a motor oiler. Still can't drink that. It's still a little warm. Who in the world is emailing me right now? I'm busy. I'm a very busy person. Someone's live on Twitch. We may actually give that person a host after we're done. We'll see. Her sudden turn of phrase startled me. Why do you say that? Instinctively, my gaze swept the deck. An Earth woman and child and a small Venus man were in sight, but not within earshot. Why do you look so furtive? Greg, there's something strange about this voyage. I'm no fool, and neither are you, and you know it as well as I do. Rance Rankin. She leaned closer toward me. He could fool you, but not me. I've known too many real magicians. She grinned. I challenged him to trick me. You should have seen him trying to evade. Do you know Ob Hahn? Never heard of him, but he told me plenty at breakfast. Good heavens, what a flow of words that devil driver can muster. He and the Englishman don't mesh very well, do they? She stared at me, and I hadn't answered her grin. My mind was too busy with strange fancies. Halsey's words,
"Things are always not always what they seem."
were these passengers masqueraders? Put here by George Price? And then I thought of Miko the Martian and the burn upon his arm. Come back, Greg. Don't go wandering off like that. I'll be serious. I want to know what in the heavens is going on aboard this ship. I'm a woman and I'm curious. You tell me. What do you mean? I mean a lot of things. What we've just been talking about and what the excitement you were in just before... What was that excitement you were in just before breakfast this morning? Excitement? Greg, you must trust me. For the first time, she was wholly serious. Her gaze made sure no one was within hearing and she set her hand on my arm. I could scarcely hear her whisper. I know they might have a ray upon us. I'll be careful. They? Anyone. Something's going on. You know it. You're in it. I saw you this morning, Greg, wild eyes, chasing a phantom. You? And I heard the phantom, a man's footsteps. A magnetic, reflecting, invisible cloak. You couldn't fool an audience with that. It's too commonplace. If Rance Rankin tried... I gripped her. Don't prattle on, Venza. You saw me? Yes, my stateroom door was open. I was sitting with a cigarillo. I saw the purser in the smoking room. He was visible. Wait. Venza, that prowler went through the smoking room? I know he did. I could hear him. Did the purser hear him? Of course. The purser looked up, followed the sound with his gaze. I thought it was strange. He never made a move. And then you came along and he acted all innocent. Why? Why? What's going on? That's what I want to know. I held my breath. Venza, where did the prowler run to? Can you... Into A20. I saw the door open and close. I think I could even see the blurred outline of him, those magnetic cloaks. Why should George Price be sneaking around with you after him? And is the purser acting innocent? Who's this George Price anyway? The huge Martian Miko with his... Oh, never mind, that's not dialogue, lol. The huge Martian, Miko, with his sister Moa, came strolling along the deck. They nodded as they passed us. I can't explain anything right now, but you're right, Venza. There's something going on. Listen, whatever you learn, anything you encounter which looks unusual, can you tell me? I trust you. I really do, but this thing isn't really mine to tell. The somber pools of her eyes were shining. You're very lovable, Greg. I won't question you. She was trembling with excitement. Whatever it is, I want to be in it. Here's something I can tell you now. We've 2 high-class gold leaf gamblers aboard. Did you know that? No. Who are Shack and Dud, aren't they? Let me state, every detective in the great New York knows them. They had a wonderful game with that English Sir Arthur Coniston this morning. Stripped him of half a pound of 8-inch leaves in a neat little stack. A crooked game, of course. Those fellows are more nimble-fingered than Rance Rankin ever dared to be. I sat, staring at her. She was a mine of information, this girl. Ooh. Oh. You must excuse me. Oh, even getting up and stretching, my back and shoulders still like to crack at me. And Greg, I tried my charms on Shack and Dud. Nice men, but dumb. Whatever's going on, they're not in on it. They wanted to know what kind of a ship this was. Why? Because Shack has a cute little eavesdropping microphone of his own. He had it working in the night last night. He overheard George Prince and that giant Miko arguing about the moon. Venza, softer. Against all propriety of the public deck, she pretended to don't know how to words. Against all propriety of the public deck, she pretended to drape herself upon me. Her hair smothered my face as her lips almost touched my ear. Lewd. Something about the treasure on the moon. Shack couldn't understand what. And they mentioned you. He didn't hear what they said because the purser joined them. 100 pounds of gold leaf. That's the purser's price. He's with them, whatever it is. He promised to do something for them. Well? That's all. Shack's current was interrupted. Well, tell him to try it again, Venza. I'll talk with... No, I won't talk with him. I better let him alone. Can you get him to keep his mouth shut? I think he might do anything I told him. He is a man, after all.
Find out what you can.
She sat away from me suddenly. There's Anita and George Price. They came to the corner of the deck, but turned back, and Venita caught my look, and understood it. So you love Anita Price as much as that, Greg? I wish you... I wish some man handsome as you would gaze after me like that. She turned solemn. You may be interested to know she loves you. I could see it. I knew it when I mentioned her to you this morning.
Me? We've hardly spoken.
Is it necessary? I never heard that it was. I couldn't see Venza's face. She stood up suddenly, and when I rose behind her, she whispered, We should not be seen talking so long. I'll find out what I can. I stared after her slight robed figure as she turned into the lounge archway and vanished. And so we come to chapter 6. I'll bookmark our place here. No, hello. I would like to bookmark our place here. Bookmark. And I'm going to turn to the footnotes and read those so we know what's going on. We have at least 2 chapters left. 3 chapters. 4 chapters. 5 chapters. 6 chapters. Ooh. I don't know that I should scroll all the way this way. Oh well. We'll just... hang on. It's not going to be at the end of this. It's going to be at the end of the thing. So let me just go to the... hang on. Footnotes. With the chapter thing. Anyway, the first footnote. As early as 1910, it was discovered that an object magnetized under certain conditions was subject to a loss of weight, its gravity partially nullified. The Martel discovery undoubtedly followed that method. That's footnote 1. Footnote 2. United States of the World, which came into being in 2057 upon the centenary of the Yellow War. Footnote 3. Trinite hour, as in 3 a.m. Footnote 4. Pressure sickness, caused by the difficulty of maintaining a consistently normal air pressure within the vessel, owing to the sudden extreme changes from heat to cold. 5. Footnote 5, Set and Seta, the Martian equivalent of Mr. and Mrs. Finally, footnote 6. A Venus form of jocular, intimate greeting. Alright, so let me go back to the, let me go back to my... No, don't put a bookmark there. Stop that. Ooh. Hi. Hello. I would like to... go to my notes and marks. There we go. So we will come back next week. Actually, no. We're gonna do one more chapter, because that didn't take as long as I thought it was going to. But we did get to read those footnotes. Take notes, everybody. Chapter 6. A traitor and a passing asteroid. Captain Carter was grim. So they've
bought him off, have they? Go bring him in there, Greg. We'll have it out with him now.
Snap, Dr. Frank, Balch, our first officer, and I were in the captain's chart room. It was 4 p.m., our Earth starting time. We were 16 hours upon our voyage. I found Johnson in his office in the lounge. Captain wants to see you, close up. He closed his window upon an American woman passenger who was demanding details of Martian currency and followed me forward. What is it, Greg? Well, I don't know. Captain Carter banged the slide upon us. The chart room was insulated, and the hum of the current was obvious. Johnson noticed it, and he started at the hostile faces of the surgeon and Balch, and tried to bluster. Well, what is this? Something wrong? Carter wasted no words.
We have information, Johnson. There's some undercover plot here aboard. I want to know what it is. Let's suppose you tell us frankly.
The purser looked back. What do you mean? I mean, there's gamblers aboard, if that's... To hell with that. You had a secret interview with the Martian, Seth Milko, and with George Price. Johnson scowled at them from under his heavy brows, and then raised them in surprise. Did I? You mean changing their money? I don't like your tone, Balch. I'm not your under-officer.
But you're under me. Good heavens, I'm master here.
Well, I'm not disputing that. This fellow Balch...
We're in no mood for argument. You're clouding the issue.
I won't let it be clouded.
I'd never seen Carter so choleric. He was evidently under a tremendous strain. He added,
Johnson, you've been acting suspiciously. I don't give a darn whether I've proof of it or not. I say it. Did you or did you not meet George Prince and that Martian last night?
No, I did not. And I don't mind telling you, Captain Carter, your tone offends me.
Is it? Is it offensive?
Carter suddenly seized him. They were both very large men, and Johnson's heavy face went purplish red.
Take your hands!
They were struggling. Carter's hands were fumbling at the purser's pockets, and I leapt and flung an arm around Johnson's neck, pinning him. Easy there. We've got you, Johnson. Snap tried to help me.
Go on, bang him on the head, Greg. Now's your chance.
We searched him. A heat ray cylinder, which was legitimate, but we did find a small battery and a eavesdropping microphone, similar to the one Venza had mentioned Shaq the Gambler was carrying.
What are you doing with that?
The captain demanded.
None of your business. Is it criminal? Carter, I'll have the line officials dismiss you for this. Take your hands off me, all of you.
Look at this! From Johnson's breast pocket, the surgeon drew a folded document. It was a scale drawing of the planetaria's interior corridors, the lower control rooms and mechanisms, and it was always kept in Johnson's safe. And with it, another document, the ship's clearance papers, the secret code passwords to this voyage, to be used if we should be challenged by any interplanetary police ship.
Good heavens, that was in the helio room, Strongbotch. I'm the only one on this vessel except the captain who's entitled to know those passwords.
Out of the silence, Balch demanded.
Well, what about it, Johnson?
The purser was still defiant.
I won't answer your questions, Balch. At the proper time, I'll explain. Greg Haljan, you're choking me.
I eased up, but shook him. You'd better talk. He was exasperatingly silent.
Enough! He can explain when we get to port. Meanwhile, I'll put him where he'll do no more damage. Greg, lock him in the cage.
We ignored his violent protestations. The cage, in the old days of sea vessels on Earth, they called it the brig, was the ship's jail. A steel-lined, windowless room located under the deck, in the peak of the bow. I dragged the struggling Johnson there, with the amazed watcher looking down from the observatory window at our lunging, starlit forms. Shut up, Johnson, if you know what's good for you. He was making a fearful commotion. Behind us, where the deck narrowed at the superstructure, half a dozen passengers were gazing in surprise.
I'll have you thrown out of the service, Greg Haljan.
I shut him up and flung him down the ladder, into the cage, and sealed the deck trap door upon him. I was headed back for the chart room when from the observatory came the lookout's voice.
An asteroid, Haljan. Officer Blackstone wants you.
I hurried to the turret bridge, where an asteroid was in sight. We'd attained nearly our maximum speed now, and an asteroid was approaching, so dangerously close that our trajectory would have to be altered. I heard Blackstone's signals ringing in the control rooms, and met Carter as he ran to the bridge with me.
That scoundrel will get
more out of him, Greg. By goodness, I'll put the chemicals on him, torture him, illegal or not.
We had no time for further discussion. The asteroid was rapidly approaching. Already under the glass, it was a magnificent sight. I'd never seen this tiny world before. Asteroids aren't numerous between the Earth and Mars, or in toward Venus for that matter. I never expected to see this one again. How little of the future we humans fathom, even for all our science. If I could only have looked into the future even for a few short hours, how different then would have been the outcome of this tragic voyage. The asteroid came rushing at us, and with an orbital velocity I later computed 22 miles a second. Our own at the present maximum was a fraction over 77. The asteroid had been for some time under observation by the lookout. He gave his warning when it only seemed that the trajectory of ours could be altered to avoid a dangerously close passing. At the combined speeds of nearly 100 miles a second, the asteroid swept into view. With the naked eye, at first it was a tiny speck of stardust, unnoticed in the gem-strewn black velvet of space. A speck. Then a gleaming dot, silver-white with the light of our sun upon it. 5 minutes. The dot grew to a disk, expanding, a full moon silver-white. Brightest world in the firmament, the light from it bathed the Planetara, illumined the deck, painting everything with silver. I stood with Carter and Blackstone on the turret bridge, and it was obvious unless we altered our course, the asteroid would pass too close for safety. Already we were feeling its attraction. From the control rooms came the report that our trajectory was disturbed by this new mass so near.
"You'd better make your calculations now, Greg,"
Blackstone suggested. I cast up the rough elements from the observational instruments in the turret. It gave me some 10 or 15 minutes. When I had us upon our new course, with the attractive and repulsive plates in the Planetara's hull set in their altered combinations, I went out to the bridge again. The asteroid hung over our bow quarter, no more than 20 or 30,000 miles away, a giant ball now filling all that quadrant of the heavens. The configuration of its mountains, its land and water areas, were plainly visible. Its axial rotation was apparent.
"Oh my, perfectly habitable, but I've searched all over this hemisphere with a glass. No sign of human life, certainly nothing civilized, and nothing in the fashion of cities."
A fair little world, by the look of it. A tiny globe. Blackstone had figured it at some 800 miles in diameter. And there seemed to be a normal atmosphere. We could see areas where the surface was obscured by clouds, and oceans and land masses, polar ice caps, lush vegetation at its equator. Blackstone had roughly cast its orbital elements. It was a narrow ellipse. No wonder we had never encountered this fair little world before. It had come from the outer region, beyond Neptune. At perihelion it would reach inside Mercury, round the Sun, and head outward again. We swept past the asteroid at a distance of some 6,000 miles. Close enough, in very truth. A minute of flight at our combined speeds, totaling 100 miles a second. I had descended to the passenger deck, where I stood alone at a window, gazing. Passengers were all gathered to view the passing little world, and I saw, not far from me, Anita, standing with her brother, and the giant figure of Miko with them. Half an hour since, first with the naked eye, this wandering little world had begun to show itself. It swam slowly past and began to dwindle behind us. A huge half-moon, a thinner, smaller quadrant, a tiny crescent like a silver bar pin to adorn some lady's chest. And then it was a dot, a point of light indistinguishable among the myriad others, hovering in the great black void. The incident of the passing of the asteroid was over. I turned from the deck window and my heart leapt. The moment for which all day I had been subconsciously longing for was at hand. Anita was sitting in a deck chair, momentarily alone. Her gaze was on me as I looked her way, and she smiled an invitation for me to join her. Chapter 7. Unspoken Love. Unspoken love. I think that if I had yielded to the impulse of my heart, I'd have poured out all those protestations of a lover's ecstasy in Congress here upon the starlit public deck to a girl I hardly knew. I think, too, she might have received them with a tender acquiescence. The starlight was mirrored in her dark eyes, misty eyes with the great reaches of unfathomable space in their depths. And yet I felt their tenderness. Unfathomable strangeness of love. Who am I to write with it? Write of it, even. with all the poets of all the ages striving to express the unexpressible. A bond strangely fashioned by nature between me and this little dark-haired earth beauty, as though marked by the stars, we were destined to be lovers. Thus ran the romance of my unspoken thoughts, anyway. But I was sitting quietly in the deck chair, striving to regard her gentle beauty impersonally, and saying, "But, Miss Prince, why are you and your brother going to Ferrok-Shahn? His business—" Even as I voiced it, I hated myself for such a question. So nimble is the human mind that mingled my rhapsodies of love was my need for information of George Price. "Oh, this is a pleasure trip, not for business, George." It seemed to me that a shadow crossed her expressive face, but it was gone in an instant, and she smiled. "We've always wanted to travel. We were alone in the world, you know. Our parents died when we were children." I filled in her pause. "You'll like Mars. So many interesting things to see." "Yes, I understand so. Our Earth is so much the same all over, cast all in one mold." "But 102 years ago, it wasn't, Miss Prince. I've read how the picturesque Orient, differing from, well, great New York or London, for instance. Transportation did that, make everything the same, that people all look alike, dress alike." We discussed it, and she had an alert, eager mind, childlike in its curiosity, and yet strangely matured. And her manner was naively earnest. Yet this was no clinging vine, this little Anita Prince. There was a firmness, a hint of masculine strength in her chin, and in her manner, for that matter. "If I were a man, what wonders could I achieve in this marvelous age?" Her sense of humor made her laugh at herself. "It's easy for a girl to say that." "You certainly do have greater wonders to achieve, Miss Price," I said impulsively. "Yes, what are they?" "The wonders of the next generation. A little son cast in your own gentle image—" What madness, this clumsy, brash talk. I choked it off. Thankfully, she took no offense. The dark rose petals of her cheek were mantled deeper red, but she laughed. "That's true. I shouldn't laugh. The wonders of the next generation, conquering humans marching on." Her voice trailed away, and my hand went to her arm. A strange tingling, something the poets call love. It burned and surged from my trembling fingers into the flesh of her forearm. The starlight glowed in her eyes, and she seemed to be gazing, not at the silver-lit deck, but away into the distant reaches of the future. And she murmured, "A little son, cast in my own gentle image, but with the strength of his father." Our moment, just a breathless moment, given us as we sat there, with my hand burning our arm, as though we both might be seeing ourselves joined in a new individual. A little son, cast in his mother's gentle image, and with the strength of his father. Our moment, and then it was over. A step sounded, and I sat back. The giant gray figure of Miko came past, his cloak swaying, his clanking sword ornament beneath it. His bullet head with close-cropped hair was hatless. And he gazed at us, swaggered past, and turned the deck corner. And so the moment passed with him. Anita said conventionally, "It's been pleasant to talk with you, Mr. Hall-John." "But we'll have many more. I mean, with 10 days, you think we'll reach Ferrok-Shahn on the schedule?" "Yes, I think so. As I was saying, Miss Price, you'll enjoy Mars. A strange, aggressively forward-looking people." An oppression seemed on her once more, and she stirred in her chair. "Yes, they are. My brother and I know there are many Martians in Great New York." She checked herself abruptly. Was she sorry she had said that? It honestly seemed so. Miko was coming back, and he stopped this time before us. "Your brother would like to see you, Anita. He sent me to bring you to his room." The glance he shot me had a touch of insolence. I stood up, and he towered a head over me. "Oh, yes, I'll come." I bowed. "I'll see you again, Miss Price. Thanks for the pleasant half hour." The Martian led her away, and her little figure was like a child with a giant. It seemed, as they passed the length of the deck with me staring after them, that he took her arm roughly, and that she shrank from him in fear. And they didn't go out inside. As though to show me he had merely taken her from me, he stopped at a distant deck window and started talking to her. Once he picked her up as one would pick up a child to show... Once he even picked her up as one would pick up a child to show it some distant object through the window. A little son with the strength of his father, her words echoed in my mind. Was Anita afraid of this Martian's wooing? Yet held to him by some power he might have over her brother? A vagrant thought attacked me. What is that? Well, we'll find out what it is next week in Chapter 8, A Scream in the Night. So thanks for tuning in, folks. Sorry about the technical difficulties. It's a little bit, it was a little bit of a surprise, but I still certainly enjoyed reading the story with y'all, as I usually do. Stream VOD goes up on Saturday as usual. For the people watching the stream VOD, if you want the neat space noises I was listening to in the stream, go ahead. There's a link in the description that you can click. But that's about it. I think that's everything, folks. Thanks for tuning in to Paper Cuts. This was a good test of how things are going to go once I am not on the radio anymore. And hopefully we'll see you next week. Actually, we won't see you next week. That's something I have to mention. I won't see you next week because we're on Thanksgiving break from classes, and I'm not coming all the way back in here to do my radio show. So, this coming week, there will not be an episode of Paper Cuts. Just keep that in mind. And hopefully there will be can't speak. Hopefully there will be one for the week after that. And I'm not sure how many episodes of Paper Cuts are left, actually. But hopefully the episodes of Paper Cuts will continue, but rather than being on the radio, there'll be a live stream sort of thing. Anyway, folks, thanks for tuning in. And, shoot, I need to host someone before I go. Let's see if there's anyone streaming on Twitch that I would like to host right now. Twitch. Let's look who's streaming right now, so we can host someone and say hello. Do at least one whole raid. It's going to be a little bit different from, oh hey, Ram's streaming. Let's go say hello. So, we're going to go raid Say a Pimp. Let me type that in the chat. Twitch.tv/Sayapimp. There you go. We're going to raid Sayapimp, everybody. Head on over there with the message of just Glacier Raid. There you go. Everybody go. We'll give them a host and all that. Thanks for tuning in, folks. Oh. What? Guest tipped $5. Oh, someone tipped money. Alright. I will absolutely take that. It says guess. I'm assuming there's like one person it could be. Guest donated $5 and says, "Hey, you dingus, here's $5. Well, thank you for the $5, mysterious benefactor. I wonder whoever it could be. Thanks for tuning in, folks. See you guys later.